My name is Folarin Aluko. I am a partner in the firm of Truman Rockwood Solicitors. I am a legal practitioner, an IP lawyer, and an esteemed lawyer, among others. I'm the immediate past chairman of the NBA Abuja branch and a friend of Chineye's. Thank you. I hear some haters somewhere.
My name is
Please give us your opening remark.
Okay, Chinenye, thanks so much. Let me, on behalf of the management team of the National Broadcasting Commission, welcome you to this session. Unfortunately, your camera can't pan, but as I sit here, I'm surrounded by my entire management. They are listening in. And if there's any need for me to tap from them in the course of the engagement, I will do so. But let me mention that we have Frank Ayeton here. Mrs. Ayeton is the Director of Public Affairs of NBC. There's Matthew Achara. Matthew Achara is the Director in the DG's office, meaning he's my own director. Boniface Ekwalo. Boniface Ekwalo is the Director for Finance. We have Engineer Mrs. Eke. Mrs. Eke is NBC Director for Technology. And we have Madam Stella Eruse. She's the Director for Broadcast Policy and Research. And then there's Dr. Tony Anigala. Dr. Anigala is the Director of Human Resources and Management. Director of Monitoring. Director of Monitoring. Dr. Anigala is Director of Monitoring. So that's my team. Let me say, like someone hinted, this is a very topical issue. I'm sure all of us have been following the raging intercourse and intellectual exchange that has been going around the subject. And there's no way you can exhaust discussions about issues that relate to the well-being of people, especially when it comes to do with basic survival initiatives. So, but the NBC remains very open to discussion. I must state that from the beginning. We have had a robust culture of engagement historically, and we intend to keep that. So I welcome you to this discussion. I can see it's a college of intellectual and entertainment lawyers. And it's interesting to see that there are people, young lawyers like you, obviously I'm older than all of you, who have committed their entire life career to dealing with the subject of entertainment. So you're welcome.
Thank you so much, sir, for the opening remarks. I'm happy to know that you and your team are dedicated to this work. It's not easy, we know, to come up with policies and regulations for various industries. And we know that the government always means well. It's just that sometimes, depending on how it goes about, people might find some aspects of certain regulations to be troublesome, or it might actually affect their livelihoods. And that's why we thought it would be very important to have this conversation to sensitize people so that they can know more, so that we don't just rely on Twitter and tabloids to trash out these issues. So thank you very much, sir, for making our time. Everyone on your team has been quite helpful and responsive. In fact, we were very pleased to be able to get a response from you to come on this webinar. So we're very, very grateful to have you here. On this conversation, we'll take the different sides, the pros and the cons. And we hope to learn more. I want to learn more as well, so that I can sensitize people, because, as lawyers, we advise our clients, and we all want the greater good for Nigeria. We all want people to be able to come into Nigeria and invest and also have, return on their investments. So this is a very balanced panel. We have people who are very objective and people who will shed light on the different aspects, both from the aspect of the practitioners, from the aspect of the regulators, and so on and so forth. So I hope you would indulge us. We're not going to take too long. We hope that this webinar will be over max in an hour and a half. Thank you all for joining us. We have so many people calling in from, outside Nigeria, all the way from Southern Africa. We have people from Lagos, from Enugu, from different parts of the country joining us on this webinar. So it's going to be an exciting conversation. So on this note, I'm going to go to Beverly. Beverly is in Lagos right now, and she's quite enthusiastic about the sports sector in Nigeria. She's done amazing work in that sector. And obviously, we know that this MBC code affects the sports sector, and she's been kind enough to come up with a presentation for us. So over to you, Beverly. Let us know what the pros and the cons are. Thank you. Beverly, your mic is muted. Sorry, let me unmute you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that. I'm just going to set up the presentation so you can see it clearly. And then we'll take it from there. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right, so you can see my screen, hopefully. Excellent. So thank you so much again for having me on to share my opinion, my views on what the positives there are for the Nigeria's creative and sports industries. Okay, so we all know that it's me speaking, so I'll skip this. So effectively, we have a sports and creative sector that has so much potential, okay? And it has established global footprints, especially in the area of film and music. But the thing is, our sports industry is yet to enjoy that potential that the film and music industry is enjoying. And if we look at the figures that a recent PwC report gives us, it quotes $10.5 billion as the value of the entertainment industry currently in Nigeria as it is. But the thing is, the sports industry actually doesn't show up on our GDP. It's subsumed within the entertainment industry. And what we really want to see is the sports industry lifted out, sort of emancipated, so that it can become a thriving industry in itself. Now, we know that the local sports industry is lagging behind. So there's an urgent call, and I am happy for this webinar, because the webinars like this will raise the awareness about the need for the industry to optimize its structures, innovate, adopt enabling policies such as the code, which is why we're here today having this discussion. At the end of the day, what we're looking for is what will enhance the potential of the sports industry in particular, because I know my colleague Isioma is going to dwell more on the entertainment industry. So for the benefit of those who maybe have heard of sports law or sports practice, I thought I would just break things down a little bit. So what are sports broadcasting rights? We all generally watch sports events. Most of us have watched a football game once in our lives. There are intricate details that fall on the back of how these things work. And those are called rights to air. So a right to air is that commercial benefit given to a body, say a sports body or a regulator, to enable it view events, competitions, etc. on platforms such as television, radio, online streaming platforms, etc. You see, until we harness the power of our media broadcasting, the state of our leagues, whether it's football, whether it's volleyball, tennis, will continue to remain in dire straits, because the capital is the lifeblood of any industry. And as it stands, the sale of broadcasting and media rights in sports still remains, till today, the biggest revenue spinner. As at today, USA Today quoted the value of EPL broadcasting rights as $9.8 billion. So we're talking huge amounts of money, okay? Sports is a very capital intensive industry. You need to maintain infrastructure. Now we're talking about digital infrastructure as well. You need to maintain the refurbishment of stadiums, because that's exactly where these events take place. And if you don't have all these things together, it then makes it quite difficult to even talk about putting on an event, not to talk of selling broadcast rights. So now we want to take a glance at the key amendments in the NBC code that will affect sports directly. So I think the most significant thing that a lot of people have paid attention to is the fact that you're going to have to need authorization if you want to air, whether you're a digital or online broadcasting service, you now have to register. You can't just beam or stream as you used to previously. And you know, with the rise of digital platforms, we've seen a plethora of online broadcasters, which is a good thing, because at the end of the day, content creation is what's driving the media industry. We need content, but at the same time, there's the call that that content needs to be regulated. Another key thing is international broadcasters must bid now for the right to air content uniquely in Nigeria. You know, there's that whole emancipation of the Black man going on. We can no longer look at ourselves in a small manner. We should look at ourselves as a jurisdiction. It is not good enough to put Nigeria under the sub-Saharan blanket. So I think that's actually a very good thing. We will have stronger bargaining chips if we deal and negotiate country to country or country to a broadcasting body, as opposed to treating us all with one blanket. The prohibition of anti-competitive practices is the most important thing. That goes without saying. We know that there have been monopolistic practices, we're not naming names, but there have been. And that stranglehold is what this code aims to break up. So now, if you still intend to continue broadcasting in Nigeria or within Nigerian space, you're now going to have to sub-license your rights to local content providers. Again, we'll look in more detail whether that's a good thing or whether that's a bad thing. The code will also prohibit broadcasters from acquiring exclusive rights. So that means things like EPL will no longer be exclusive to certain platforms, etc. Now, the really interesting part for me concerns advertising. So, you know, when you have a big game, but think about last year, the Women's World Cup, you know, for the first time, we saw a few local content providers scrambling to advertise, some local companies in Nigeria scrambling to be associated with, you know, the Women's World Cup. But now, it's not going to be enough to say, okay, I'm a local company, I want to, you know, associate my brand with this international game. You are also going to have to dedicate your revenue or your, you know, your capital to advertising with local leagues, with equivalent local sports competitions. So whether that's the local swimming galas, whether that's the Lagos Open, if you're going to be supporting the US Open, you're going to have to support the Lagos Open. So just as an example. And then disputes. I thought that was also quite interesting, whereby, yes, it promotes, it doesn't, I like the fact that it recognizes that we need to move media, creative, sporting disputes further and further away from the traditional courts. I am definitely for that because, you know, I myself, I'm a mediator, practicing mediator, and I would prefer to see more creative, sports, entertainment disputes come in that direction because it's faster. But what I did feel was that it restricted it to arbitration. So I guess we'll be discussing that in more detail later. So those are just some, I mean, there's a few more than this, but these were the key ones I thought I would pick up on. So now let's look quickly at the pros and the cons. I'm sure in the process of me discussing, some things would have rung some alarm bells, or maybe, oh yeah, that's great, we like that. So let's start with the pros. Clearly, it's going to reduce highly anti-competitive practices. This is great. You cannot grow an industry where there's a monopoly. It's as clear as day. If we really want the local leagues, the local sports industry to grow and thrive.
Sorry, sorry to interrupt you. Your presentation, some comments are coming in about it.
Oh, wow.
Style so that we can see, because it's not moving from here.
Oh, it's not moving. Oh, so what do you see? Do you see pros and cons?
No, we just see only the first page.
So sorry.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Let me see what I can do. That is really strange. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. But
can
sorry
you
to break your.
Is this better? Is this? Can you see? What do you see? Can you see it now? Can you see?
Right now, I don't see any difference.
Oh wow, I'm terrible with tech.
To presentation view, one of our participants. We have very useful participants in the house. it says change it to presentation. So let me see, because it's a PowerPoint, you can just present. There's present on top of it. I can see, yeah. No, go down a little bit. There's a place, yeah. No, on top of it.
Show names.
Present.
No.
There's something that says present there. Just click on
Yeah,
it.
I don't see that.
It's besides share.
Oh, right. Oh, Q&A? No.
No. Oh, you know what? Just go ahead, just so that we don't. But we're not able to see.
Don't
Can
worry.
You...
I will make
Okay.
I will make the slides available if
Okay.
that's okay.
You can try entering full screen or click present. There's a tab beside share that says present.
Okay.
Where the face.
One second. And we tested this, didn't we?
Go into PowerPoint and choose presenter view. Thank you so much, Adeyemi Johnson. Yes, much better. Yes. Thank you.
Is it good now?
Yes.
It's good?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. I'm sorry about that. Okay. So we've dwelt on the key amendments anyway. So let's just have a quick run through the pros and cons, if that's okay. So like we've said, the pros, the most important thing is it will reduce highly anti-competitive practices. No local industry can thrive whilst there's a reigning monopoly. It's just the truth. We need to encourage more local content providers to come on board to play in the market. We also need to increase Nigeria's bargaining power. We need to free ourselves from this sort of archaic colonialistic view of how Africa is. You don't deal with Africa on a geographical, on a mass level, on a block level. You trade with us country to country to country. Sorry, I'm a bit of a pro-African, have those kinds of views. We also want to divert the flow of much needed capital to our local markets, and moreover, encouraging local content creation and innovation. Now, the cons also are there, no doubt. The issue of deterring international broadcasters does rear its ugly head. The reason is because now we are setting quite prescriptive rules with regards to the percentage we want to see them invest. So it's almost like for like. So if you're spending X amount on broadcasting rights for X tournament, then you have to spend X percentage in a local equivalent tournament. Now, I don't know if it quite works like that, because you also have to bear mind to what are the present day realities. The present day realities are we have, yes, NPFL and such, they're all coming up, but we still have very few stadiums that are actually wired up properly to even deliver proper live games. Very few, I think less than 2 in the whole country are wired up properly. So you're asking yourself, why are we then forcing the international broadcasters to invest where they're not even sure there's a proper demand? Okay. Now, I also feel that the code doesn't focus too much on structural change. Structural change, when I speak of structural change, I'm referring to what it will take to get our local content to the same standard as, say, international. It's not enough to say, yes, we must divert the monies this way. Okay, what happens when it goes there? How are we sure that it will produce the same quality of content, etc.? And then also, there appears to be some kind of conflict with the Copyright Act as well, because now what we're saying is you no longer can own exclusivity. However, the Copyright Act says otherwise. So what are we saying? The code is subject to, it's only a supplemental law. It's still subject to the primary source of law. So how do we balance out these sort of contradicting opposing sides of view? Then I also feel that there might be a little bit of interference in what should naturally be, it's a commercial agreement that should be reached between 2 parties that want to deal together. Now, we're now trying to interfere, unquote, in deals that should be driven by market forces. Okay, at the end of the day, when we look at all, the most profitable leagues in the world, they are that profitable because the demand is there. There is a demand, and the demand drives the value. Now we are almost trying to create an artificial situation. The intent is good, all well and good, because at the end of the day, even in the UK, a certain amount of profits are distributed to grassroots, but it's done in a sort of different way. It doesn't demand that the broadcasters themselves have to divert. That is handled by the FA. It's handled by them. They will determine, okay, this is how much will go out. So I feel like we're now kind of creating a bit of an artificial situation, and how can it best be monitored? So for me, my conclusions are this: the provisions are well intentioned, okay? It has the aim. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Before you get to conclusions, okay, you can go ahead, but I would have wanted us to go to other thoughts, but you can give us your
direct me. I am at your disposal.
Yes. So everybody is going to make their conclusions and their recommendations. Let's hold off on your conclusions for now. Let's unpack it a bit more. Yes, I'd really love the Professor Armstrong to respond to some of the things you've said, and then we'll move on to two other panelists, because I want him to know, I want him to tell us whether we've done a fair analysis of the code, because they are the ones who are, custodians of the code. So I would like you to respond at this point.
Sorry, Chineye, I do feel that before Professor Armstrong responds, there should be perspectives from the film industry discussed. Because Beverly, fantastic job, and I think we're very much aligned in terms of the grand views on the code, but I think that there's a need to discuss the film and television impact, and then MDC can then respond in whole to all those issues. I don't know what you think, but I think that would.
Okay, let me ask you, sir, would you like to respond now, or do we take the other two views of the other panelists?
Yeah, I will just make a brief comment and say that for Beverly, that's a fantastic analysis of what we have done so far. I'm very impressed that you took your time to read through the document. I think that once we get inputs from other panelists, then we can take the whole issues holistically. Is that okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you. Isioma, over to you. Would like to have your comments, and then afterwards, Folarin Aluko can make his comments as well. Keep the comments coming, and keep the Q&A questions coming as well.
So thank you so much, Chineye, and thank you so much, FEMA Advisory, for taking the initiative to put this panel together. Like, there was so much discourse on social media with articles flying back and forth on the issue.
We're having challenges with your internet. I don't hear how. Is it just me? Can other participants hear her?
A place with professionals doing objective analysis.
It's your man. Sorry, we're having problems with your.
And I want to align with a lot of what Beverly has said in her fantastic presentation, which I thought was rather balanced and spoke very well to the. Can you hear me now?
No. You have to use your backup internet. We can't hear you. It's going in. No, we can't hear you. You're breaking up. A lot of participants are complaining. Oh.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Hello. Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm actually on my backup internet. I'm so sorry. I have this jinx. Anytime I have to do a webinar, my internet never works. It's just a curse. I don't know why. So I'm really sorry about that. Okay, so I was just saying that I was saying that Beverly's presentation was just a fantastic segue into the conversation. And I was thanking FEMA Advisory for taking the initiative to put this conversation together. It's much needed to have independent professional people do objective analysis on the code. And I wanted to thank the NBC because the creative industry has always suffered from a lack of interest, where the government pays a lot of lip service to the issues of the industry and then really never takes any constructive steps towards putting in, whether it's regulations or just generally creating an enabling environment. And from the reading of the code, you get a sense that this code is trying to put around much needed protectionist policies that prioritize the growth of local production and local content, and ultimately the growth of the local entertainment and sports industries. And for that, I think that's very commendable for the NBC. I don't need to speak about sports rights because Beverly has done it justice, so I would speak specifically to film and television. The first thing people have to understand when you're looking at the film and television perspective and you're looking at these codes is to understand sort of how does broadcasting actually work? What is broadcasting, right? And when you look at the definition of broadcasting under the NBC Code 6th edition, there actually is a lacuna because there isn't a definition of broadcasting, right? And so issues like VOD, video on demand, TVOD, so that would deal with people like Netflix, Amazon, is not adequately addressed as to whether or not they are regulated under this code. And this is a major problem. And why do I say it's a major problem? When we look at how broadcasting is transforming across the world, video on demand, TVOD, SVOD, this is the future of broadcasting. And even if this code has all the right language that prioritizes local content and the rest of that, if there isn't a clear definition that says that those types of platforms are subject to this code, then we have missed an opportunity for it to have real impact. I see in the first section of the code that there's an attempt to speak about internet, but that's not enough of a definition to cover those types of platforms. So in terms of the code actually having impact, this is something that needs to be redrafted and revised, and there needs to be a definition of broadcasting within the code as an amendment to the code. That's the first point. Now, when you look at how does content actually move and how is content monetized, right? When you go on Netflix, for instance, you can see content from ABC. ABC is a huge broadcaster in the US, right? It was probably originally commissioned by ABC in the US, and after it has done its run on their platform, then they've licensed the rights to Netflix. This is not something that we see happening in the Nigerian market, right? In Nigeria, you have certain platforms that commission content and own it for life. Those content stay and die on that platform. And it doesn't serve the interest of the local producers, right? Who are missing out on the ability to syndicate. That's a key word. To syndicate the content and ultimately monetize it from different, to monetize the different rights, right? And when you're looking at broadcasting, there's pay TV, there's terrestrial, there's SVOD, there's TVOD, right? So what I see the code is trying to do is to start to cause content, locally produced content, to synthesize the way it's supposed to, the way it works in other places, right? Unfortunately, in other places, their economies have developed to the point where those things happen naturally. But in our economy here, that hasn't started to happen. And I don't think it's a bad thing for legislation to try and just give a little bit of a kick and a push, right? When I read the code, I get the sense that the code is intending to regulate the platforms, particularly to create a more competitive environment within pay TV, right? And that is important because we all know that the pay TV subsection, remember I said that in broadcasting, there are different rights. There's pay TV, there's terrestrial, there's SVOD, TVOD, there are so many rights. But this code seems to be trying to break down the monopoly in pay TV. And you see it in the reading of the language around when you start that exclusivity clause section of the code. But again, due to some drafting errors, in my opinion, I would consider them errors, language within that section then extends beyond the platforms and start to over encroach into programs. And that's where people sort of freak out. And Beverly pointed it out and saying, this is where you start having the conflict between the ability of the NBC code as a supplementary legislation to a ground norm, which would be the Copyright Act. And how does that work, right? I would argue that within the Copyright Act, there's a section that talks about compulsory licensing. And when you look at that section in the Copyright Act that speaks about compulsory licensing and put it in context of the Federal Consumer Protection Act, which we now have, I would say that the NBC code, in its attempt to make the market more competitive, would probably stand. When you read the reading, I took some notes. I'm sure you saw me writing a lot of things. When you read the FCCPC Code Act, and it talks about prohibition on restrictive agreements, and you read that in line with the language in the code, you see very strongly that the code is really trying to stop people from entering into restrictive agreements. And the obligation and the onus is on the platforms, not necessarily the content owners. And so that's where that issue of the conflict between the Copyright Act and the code, it can be sort of, there really isn't a conflict because the obligation is not really on the content owner, but on the platforms. So the platforms can no longer go into restrictive agreements with their content providers, who in this context are Nigerian content providers, so Nigerian producers, Nigerian talent. And I think that in terms of the fear of this being an over-encroachment into people's rights, at the end of the day, if I'm a producer and I don't want to have my content on another platform, this actually increases my bargaining power. Because if a platform wants to have my content exclusively and I'm okay with that, then you have to pay me far much more. Not what we're seeing now, where we have producers, certain platforms would pay $1,000 and have someone's content for 24 months, which is not fair to the local producer. So exactly like what Beverly pointed out, now the code is mandating more bargaining power. And I don't think that this is an over-encroachment. And why I don't think so is when you look at the US entertainment industry history, at a point they actually had a law, a specific law that was designed to restrict these types of exclusive agreements. Now, they took out that law 30 years after because their industry had advanced and developed to the point where it did not need that anymore, where the commercial conventions and the industry had developed to the point that people knew better and would just simply not do those types of deals. So I think based on where we are in our own economy, in our own industry, we need these types of kick. I call them kick in the bum regulations, right? To get us to get the platforms to play fairer with our content producers. And that, I'm so passionate. I'm sure you can see the passion. I'm very passionate about this. Yeah, I'm generally very passionate about the entertainment industry, but I'm very passionate about this because I was so worried when the code came out and there was a lot of propaganda slandering the code and there wasn't proper analysis. Even people who were trying to analyze the section couldn't analyze it properly. Yes, there are drafting errors, and we can sit down another day and go into the detail of the drafting errors. Like for instance, you go to subsection 9.1.19118, and it talks about, it extends this exclusivity restriction, which was supposed to be for sports and news channels. And you have to understand, what do they mean by sports and news channels? So they're saying channels like CNN, Super Sports should not be exclusively on DSTV or Star Times. It should be on any other of those types of platforms that can be available, right? Al Jazeera, those types of things. But then in 9118, it then extends it to all program, and that's where it gets a bit tricky, and then creates a situation that negates what the code is trying to do. And what is that situation? As much as we want the market to be more competitive, part of competition is actually having the channels, remember there's a distinction between the platforms and the channels. The platform is just the, how will I put it? It's like the foundation, right? And the channels are the house, are the floors in the house, right? You need for there to be competition in the floors in the house. The channels are what keeps the platforms going. So if the channels cannot have a certain level of exclusivity over their content, at least for a period of time, then you then almost make the market uncompetitive because there isn't an incentive. And I like to speak very plainly. I think I don't talk like a lawyer because I'm trying to explain this for people to understand it really granular, right? If I want this industry to be competitive, and I have said now by this regulation that there isn't exclusivity, right? This issue of exclusivity should be limited to the channels because remember I said the platform is just the foundation. So it's just like a piece of paper. The content sits with the channels. So really the exclusivity should apply to the channels. So anyone who wants and can afford to have a channel on their platform should be able to have that channel on their platform. But those channels need to be able to have exclusive content, at least for a period of time, because you create competition within the channels. So I want to be able to get more viewers onto my channel. I'm going to invest and commission in premium content that will drive viewers to my channel, right? So you can't, where the code needs to be amended is that it needs to be clear that this exclusivity applies to the platforms, but not to the channels, because we need the channels to be able to exercise exclusivity for a period of time, 24 months at least, in my opinion, right? So that they can have competition within themselves, pushing to have greater and greater content on their platforms, and therefore engaging and employing Nigerian producers and Nigerian talent. Another issue with the code is, it seems like the code is clearly trying to drive local content. But when it talks about local content, it doesn't nail it. And when I say it doesn't nail it, it doesn't even specifically say that this is the quota of content on your platform that should be local content, right? It says it gives a definition of what is considered local content. Then it says you should spend 15% of your budget on local content, which I like the fact that there's an attachment to budget, because there were already local content quotas in the NBC code. But the way it was written, it could be circumvented, and that's why you had platforms like DSTV from Africa Magic, and they say they have local content, but really they only have local content restricted to some channels, right? And if you look at those channels in the context of their entire budget of the platform, you realize that it's kind of like a drop in the water. You understand what I mean? And then it doesn't even allow for skill growth and skill exchange, because the truth is, watch Africa Magic and watch Mnet. It's two different qualities. It's like they have a special lower quality for Africa Magic, which isn't good for the industry. The industry, even if we're trying to put in protectionist policies that make people, that mandate that people have to use local producers and all that, it shouldn't be that there isn't enough competition with international content that we're not trying to up our game, right? Nigerian content should be on Mnet. It shouldn't only be restricted to Africa Magic or Rock TV and things like that. That doesn't serve us. So these are the nuances that need to be considered within a revision of the code, a revision of the drafting language of the code. It needs to be clearly spelled out that this percentage of content across the platform, not on 4 or 5 channels, across the platform, and I think that it should not be anything less than 50% for now. And over time, it should drop down, just because we're really trying to grow this industry. We need that number to be high. So that revision to local content is there. People in the music industry are doing backflips right now, because for the first time, you have the code saying that broadcasters have to have a license from collective management organizations. Coincidentally, today I just finished a study on the collective management of copyright in Nigeria that was funded by the French Development Agency. And I referred to this in the study to say that this new NBC code is a step in the right direction, because one of the problems that collective management organizations have is the inability for them to be able to properly scope usage. So by mandating that the broadcasters must have a license from the collective management organizations, you're essentially making it easier for the collective management organizations to collect royalties because their rights are being exploited on those things. I still think that there needs to be additional language that mandate things like cue sheets, things like that, those types of mandating that broadcasters have monitoring facilities and things like that, things that allow for the collective management organizations to be able to collect accurately, according to usage. I know I've gone over time. I just wanted to get all those points in. But the point is, the code is a step in the right direction, but it needs a redraft. And not just the amendments, the code itself. Because there are fundamental things that are missing that would make it difficult for the code to have the effect which I think it's intended.
Wow, thank you so much for that passionate presentation, Isioma. I am sure that the Professor Armstrong has been nodding. I'm sure that he has a lot of comments to make. I'm quite curious about what was the process of stakeholder mapping and management when this thing was put together. Because when we have the likes of Isioma and Beverly, and we would have had a more robust feedback, from the stakeholders. But I want to, before we get to you, sir, I want to touch on, the creative industry. Everything we're speaking here, everything we're saying now is very technical to the average, movie maker, to the average musician. And because there's that gap, even when we were putting together this conversation, it wasn't easy for us to actually explain these issues to the creatives. And trust me, we tried to bring them on board, but because of the legalese and because of all the terminology, it kind of scares them away from the conversation. But we said we have to go ahead because it's very important to sensitize people and to have conversations like this, because you can brainstorm and actually propose solutions that can help to improve these regulations. So I want to ask you, Folari, to speak to the creatives. I mean, they're looking at the fact that Netflix has budgeted $8 billion. That's what they're seeing. And they're seeing the likes of Genevieve Nnaji and Moabudu, who have become billionaires, just from selling content, having their rights, on exclusive rights to Netflix. So how can you explain this from that point of view, where people are looking at potentially losing revenue? Because, I mean, we already know that people are empowered through these foreign, especially the foreign ones, and then we have the local ones like Iroko TV and so on and so forth. Can you speak to that? Can you tell us from the creatives, the aspect of the creatives, how this will impact them, basically?
Okay, thank you very much, Chineye, and well done to the two previous speakers, Beverly and Isioma. I think my intervention in response to your question would come from the aspect of from the private bar, if you may, and how do I mean? When judging a piece of legislation, one looks at the intended and the unintended consequences. And in fact, I think the law of unintended consequences, should play, or the unintended consequences of any piece of legislation should be should be considered and looked at, in the sense of what other ways that are unanticipated, and what other ways would this piece of legislation impact, either the direct industry, that is the target industry, or subsidiary industries. The first thing that I would say is the amendment comes, at a time when there's a boom in content production. I think technology has disrupted practically every sector of the economy, and especially broadcast. Now you find anybody with a phone who can live stream and data, has become, quote unquote, a broadcaster. So it comes in at a time when there's a content explosion, there's a data explosion. Creators have become in the food chain. Creators, practically own a very huge chunk of that of the broadcast process, if you may, or of the entertainment process. Now, the question is, first, what impact would the code have on existing relationships, existing contractual relationships. And that's one area where I think there should be a lot of input. And you can't, the reality is that you cannot exhaust all the possible implications or impacts of any piece of legislation, especially one that touches on broadcast. The meaning of broadcast has changed significantly. Now we're talking about using broadcast to shape culture, using broadcast to shape, politics, the impact of citizen broadcasting on governance, and so on and so forth. So for me, I think one has to take a very wide panoramic view of all these considerations. And Beverly referenced the implication of a possible conflict between the provisions of the Copyright Act and the NBC, the proposed amendments in the code. I would say you also have conflicts between the right of freedom to contract, because if we're talking about how will this impact creatives, how this impact content producers, how this impact people in the all the various industries that we're trying to help to give strength to their voices. I would say one would have to look at whether it affects their power to contract and the freedom of the right to freedom of contract, which I think is very fundamental in any contract. Now I would preface, let me dial back a little. The Grundnorm, the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, lays the foundation for the NBC Code and the NBC Act, and the code is made pursuant to the Act. And if you look at some sections, especially sections that deal with, okay, power was just restored, or just turned on the gen now. If you look at sections that deal with, specifically with broadcast, if you look at section 39 of the Constitution, which talks about everybody shall be entitled to the freedom of expression, including freedom to hold and receive opinions, and so on and so forth. It then says that nothing in this section shall invalidate any law that is reasonably justifiable in a democratic society. And then it goes on to talk about for the purpose of regulating telephone, wireless broadcasting, television, or the exhibition of cinematograph films and all of that. I think for me, the operative perspective should be the question as to whether the regulation meets the standard, rather should be whether the regulation is reasonably justifiable in a democratic society, which is what that subsection 3 of section 39 of the Constitution states. And to a large extent, I would call into question a lot of the approach to regulation in Nigeria. I think to a very large extent, one of the problems that we have in Nigeria is not that we don't have laws that address some of the issues that we see in our everyday lives. The problem actually is not in the lack of laws, it's in the enforcement or in the approach to the enforcement of these laws. I think we have enough laws. The FCCP Act was enacted, also disrupted the work of several industries from SEC to CAC, it disrupted the entire landscape, and then you have the another impact was that you started having tough wars between the various regulators. And I see that with regards to the code specifically, clearly the objectives are, one cannot fault the fact that the objectives are altruistic. But then I will come from an administrative law perspective and then a market perspective. From the point of administrative law, I would ask some questions now. How does the code affect the right of parties to contract? Now, understanding that the right to freedom of contract is one that has been enforced up to the Supreme Court, in several lines of cases, and it has been established already. Two, you also have you also look at the fact that in terms of market spaces, wherever you have a market, it's always advisable to allow the market to grow in an organic manner. Now, the truth of the matter is that we have not had the opportunity as a country to, to go through all the various levels or stages of development that some other countries that we reference, like America, like Canada, like the UK, have gone through in terms of the growth of their broadcast industry. But we then find ourselves at a point where all economies or all countries seem to be, technology has shrunk or has reduced the borders between countries. So right now, live, you can find out what's going on in any country by going on Instagram and watching somebody's live feed, or going to YouTube, and watching, any streaming content there. So the question then is, how far should the regulator go to tinker with the market, the ordinary market forces, in order to achieve a certain result? We also saw the impact of the nationalization policies of I think the late 60s, the 70s. And one of the unintended consequences of those policies, which were, good in their formulation, was that many of the 70s, thank you, many of those companies, packed up and left. And so today people say, oh, where are the Batas, where are the Leventis, where are the Kingsway, and we refer to the days when those companies were here as the quote unquote golden age. In my opinion, I think regulation should focus, rather than putting a finger on the scale, because in today's climate, let me rephrase that now. Regulation should focus on creating an equitable, on ensuring that the marketplace is equitable for everybody, that everyone has the right to contract with whoever. And with regards, I don't think it's the regulator's business, with due respect, to ensure that one person is paid very well. There are already remedies for that. We have the common law right, or the common law doctrine of undue influence. We have, there are so many doctrines that adjust or that touch on the contractual, the balance of contractual powers between parties. And if you look at certain laws like the NOTAP Act, you find that where a third party or where a foreign partner enters into an agreement with a local partner, the technology transfer agreement is scrutinized by NOTAP to ensure that there's some parity. So I think in terms of the right of freedom to contract, I think if we embrace what somebody called, and these are not my words, champagne socialism, we would hurt the industry that we seek, the industries that we seek to promote, more than help them. And I'll take a quick poke at sports. Now everybody talks about EPL and how everybody watches EPL. You drag people. EPL draws eyeballs to one station over another, or one platform over another. The question then is, how about our local? Yes, the Premier League, the European Premier League. The question then is, what of our own local leagues? What is the problem with is the problem with Nigeria's local league? Is it a broadcast problem, or is the problem something else? Beverly is shaking her head. So the problem is not broadcast. You can have DSTV broadcasting, the Globalcom Premiership, and nobody watches it. And that's the problem. Where a regulator tries to put the finger on the scale, it does tend to, it may hurt us more than actually help us. So the question that right off the bat, the questions I'll ask as a lawyer is, one, how far does the power of the commission extend to make these regulations in the code? I think another place that one should also look at is the right to freedom of expression. in some places, free speech is seen to, overact almost, it towers over almost every other right. The freedom of the press is seen as an extension, or some kind of extension of the right to free speech, and as someone said, I will defend your right to free speech. I may not agree with you, but I'll defend to the death your right to say, what you want to say. Now, the response.
Falari,
What's that?
do you mind if I just ask you something? You
Okay, shoot.
mentioned that you weren't sure whether broadcasting was the issue with regards to why we don't, why is the demand so low for local content? At the end of the day, we have leaks. Why aren't people? I think we can't even discuss broadcasting because we don't even have enough infrastructure to deal with even broadcasting them in the first place.
Perfect.
So,
but that is exactly why we need the regulations to mandate that there is expenditure in that section, in that sector.
You see,
no.
I would disagree with you.
We need it. No, because if we don't, let me just make a point.
Okay.
Right now,
well, you're making a point in the middle of my.
I'm so sorry because I feel it's really important to kind of get this conversation back. And when I say get the conversation back, you said you don't know why we're having an issue with local sports broadcasting.
I didn't say I don't know why.
You raised it. You were raising.
I didn't say I don't know why. What I said was that the problem with our sports, with our leagues, our local leagues, is not broadcasting. The problem with our local leagues is organization. In fact, it's actually multifaceted. But let's say structure.
No, I think it's not I'm broadcasting. Not saying broadcasting
it's
is
not
the
eyeballs.
Issue. But what I'm saying is this: broadcasting is a major source of income for sports everywhere in the world. And if there isn't any investment in even showing whatever it is that they are doing, even if they are doing this match in the most miserable place.
Yes.
If I may say, we're putting the cart before the horse. When it comes to sports, if I can say, we have to get structured and organized.
Right.
It's
first.
Structured. The broadcasting will then be the oil that will grease the whole engine, but the engine is faulty. So broadcasting is eventually going to give us that boost we need. But trust me, no one is going to pay for content if it's not quality. How do we get the quality? Structure.
I'll make a reference to the distinction between the NBA and the WNBA. I know well. Anyway, Beverly, you understand now.
I'm going to give you 2 minutes to wrap up your thoughts. Can the other panelists just let him wrap up his thoughts in 2 minutes? Because I'd like to go to Professor Armstrong because we've raised a lot of salient issues that I want him to trash out. And remember, we need to allow the Q&A, the participants who are logged on, and we need to wrap up within 30 minutes. So I'll give you 2-3 minutes just to wrap up your thoughts so that we can go to Professor Armstrong. Thank you.
I feel I'm getting a short end of the stick, and I'm not controversial.
You have your closing remarks towards the end where you can give your recommendations. But wrap up in 2-3 minutes.
So just to piggyback off Beverly's comment, we shouldn't put the cart before the horse. Actually, with regards to many of our industries, and if you look at the various industries, you will see the impact of the forces of demand and supply, and the technology disruption based on the way people consume content. The hashtag "Don't Leave Me Challenge" gathered, I think, over 20 million views on TikTok. In less than 1 week. I think the comedian Just Too Funny was featured on CNN, and he said he had over a X number in millions of views. I'm looking at the comments, very interesting comments. Now, if you look at the response to some of the other types of content that we put out, you see a much lower level of interest. And the question is not about whether people have the opportunity to see it. If a sport or if a program is competitive enough, people will want to watch it. I was alive, thank God. I know Prof said that he's older than all of us. Well, at least I know I was alive about 20 years ago, when music videos were not, you know, in terms of quality, the production of music videos was not all that, you know, and the music industry it operated at a certain level. If you about 2 weeks ago, I watched an old take from the early 2000s, the Plantation Boys, you know, and I was like, wow, we have come a very long way. And if you note, you will see that the demand for music videos and for music content shot up, SHOT. You know, it rose in almost in response to the increase in quality and the increase in production output and, you know, directional output and all of that. So I think to a very large extent that the content drives the market. And so if we're looking at policy from the perspective of, if we're looking at how to help the industry, how to help the creative sector, the question now is, how do we empower content creators? Now, I watch multi-choice. I don't think DSTV is a, I watch DSTV. I don't think multi-choice is a monopoly. They're not a monopoly. They operate as, you know, a de facto monopoly because none of the other competitors has been able to put the necessary structures in place. We shouldn't talk too much. I watched TSTV from, you know, a very close, from close range, you know, and from the outset it was clear that they did not, all the factors that were, they had all the factors for failure. You know, it was doomed to fail from the start. I was also I did some work for Entertainment Highway for High TV back then, and High TV was on a project, was, you know, on a, what's it called now? High TV had the opportunity to actually use the exclusive license, which gave them eyeballs to build content in other areas, you know, and they didn't do that. MultiChoice then took the initiative and built content. So built content that people wanted to watch. And so the reality is that if people don't like the content on MultiChoice, you will not find people watching MultiChoice or watching DSTV. You know, it's because they have provided content, you know, for everybody. And quite interestingly, I think what MultiChoice did, you know, was that they wooed many of these companies, Viacom, you know, and some of these big content producers to South Africa to set up studios in South Africa. And so what that happens is when you set up a studio somewhere, there's a transfer of technology, there's a transfer of knowledge, it creates jobs, it creates employment, and then the quality of, or the standard of your broadcasting generally, you know, tends to increase. Now, the question is, why are these companies, why are they not setting up studios here in Nigeria? You know, why aren't they setting up these centers here in Nigeria? Or let me flip that around now. What can we do to attract them to Nigeria, to set up shop here in Nigeria? You know, and I don't think creating a hostile atmosphere for people who invest in content, you know, would help us achieve that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those thoughts. Because of time, we literally have less than about 20 minutes to wrap up this conversation, and we really want to go to the participants. We have Q&A and everything. So, Professor Armstrong, thank you so much for you know, being patient with us and just hearing all the thoughts of all the panelists. I'm sure that you're equally as excited about the passion in the room. It means that people are committed to the broadcasting industry in Nigeria. I just want to ask a frank question. You know, being somebody who is very passionate about ease of doing business in Nigeria, are these policies not going to scare investors away, especially in this COVID era? And especially, you know, the fact that a lot of creatives now see this as almost like a hope or a ray of sun. I don't know how to explain it, but people who were creating content for decades in Nigeria and were not making anything from it, all of a sudden they're making good money that they can actually live on. If these investors leave the country, it won't be a good look for a policymaker. So what would be words of maybe assurance that you would give to the creatives and to the investors that are looking at Nigeria and saying there's policy somersaults or there's uncertainty? You know, 1 minute is one thing, the next minute there's a new policy, and they are scared to bring their money into Nigeria. What would you say to reassure them that you're taking note of all the stakeholders and the effects it's going to have on the everyday Nigerian and on ease of doing business, sir?
All right. Thank you very much, Chinenye, for doing a great anchoring job, though most of the time, as is typical with lawyers, they take all the stage and all the time. I think that we have enjoyed the discussion. And for us at the NBC, we can't thank you enough for giving us these free legal insights that ordinarily we should be paying heavy money for.
Yes, sir. We're still taking, we can still send our invoice. We're all lawyers. Go ahead, sir.
It's your most of Hi. You can hear.
Sorry, your screen went.
Not nice, you can hear.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay, I was saying to Isioma that I will go to church this evening and do a special deliverance for her network.
These are some of the infrastructure issues we're talking about. So we're having difficulty with your video. Can other panelists, maybe if in the chat box, can you guys comment to see if you can?
Bandwidth low.
Wow.
I think regulation should fix issues like this. Quality of service.
Hear me now?
How do we ensure that?
Okay, they say I should turn off my video. So can you do that? Maybe
okay.
That will give me space to talk.
Yeah, this is better.
All right, is my audio better now?
Yes, it's better.
Better? Great.
Yes.
Now, so I was saying that it's illuminating, very good of the code. It's good that the code, the amendment in itself is well intentioned, right? And I remember a certain commentator in the middle of this the discussion surrounding this, who said that there's no doubt that the intention is good, but that even the road to hell is full of good intentions. Our intention is not to hell. It's for the advancement, for the good of broadcasting. In the course of the analysis, somebody did mention that even in the US, at a point in the life of the US, they had to create a specific. Are we together?
Yes, sir. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, fine. They had to create specific regulations that were supposed to protect, right, and consequently develop their own local industry. Now, regulations, broadcast regulations anywhere in the world, in any country, has a primary objective to promote the good of that country. NBC was created by law in 1992. And I joined the commission about 2 years after. At that time, there was a debate. That was the time that the cable TV industry was emerging in Nigeria. And even the FM technology on radio was incidentally just trying to pick up. And I remember that a lot of radio TV stations claimed that Nigerian content was not good enough to be played on their systems. The quality was bad, nobody would listen. But we insisted and put in a regulation that we needed to promote our local content. And we brought in a ratio that insisted that every radio TV station in Nigeria must air at least 60% local content. Now that was also extended to the cable, the satellite TV services. And somehow that contributed to the boom that we have seen in the music and video industry, to the extent now that Nigerian content is well celebrate global. There was also a time in this country when the family viewing by foreign soap opera, they were easy to be imported. So the big networks in Nigeria didn't feel like producing content. They only went to bring in the Papi Olano and the Rich Also Cry and all of that, and inundated Nigerian TV with foreign soap. NBC again came out family viewing that all content on Nigerian television must be local. And I know for sure that a lot of local independent producers actually got advertising, probably for the first time in their life dream and career, consequent upon those provisions of the code. Now, even in recent times, you may have been following the production of Big Brother Africa and all the debate that Big Brother was mostly watched by Nigerian audiences. Yet it was being produced in South Africa. And the Nigerian government said, well, why can't we produce here? We have the creatives, we have those with the technical skills, and of course we are able to do a big production like Big Brother. And fortunately, based on regulatory compulsion, somehow they also brought it over here, and I doubt if they regret it. It has been a huge success since they've been doing also in Nigeria. So our intention always is to ensure that the local industry grows, and that is a primary objective for any regulator anywhere in the world. Foreign capital. It is very important that we inject foreign capital into the Nigerian creative scene. But there's no time that the regulator in Nigeria has created, which is the primary thing about exclusivity. What we are proposing basically is to say, if you have your content, no matter what the contract is, have at the back of your mind that once you bring it into the Nigerian space, so long as Nigerians are interested, Nigerians, consumers and entrepreneurs are interested in what you have brought, you must devise a means to make it available to them. And why do we say so? We say so because we know that a lot of local Nigerian producers, creatives are looking for opportunities. Many of them don't have access to funds, so they may not be in a position, to do the big productions. Many broadcast stations for many years have not had any form of advertising. But if you have a compelling content and you are able to share, or you create windows that allow them to partake, then they too will have some attraction for advertising on their little platform. Now that way you are able to stimulate, and that was the point that this young man was making, you are able to stimulate growth within the creative subsector. And that's just the whole idea. Now, there is nowhere in this provision where the NBC has taken the position of fixing and regulating prices. We know that price decisions are driven by market. And what we expect is that owners of content will sit with people who desire to use that content and come to an agreement, especially regarding the terms of usage and how much they are going to pay. It is only when there's a breakdown in negotiations, and that is well encapsulated in our code, where there's a breakdown in negotiations or there's a fundamental disagreement, then the regulator can arbitrate. All we do is to arbitrate when there's a breakdown in negotiations. So up to the time, and if assuming that there's no disparity, there's no disagreement, there's a consensus, and everybody is happy, you wouldn't see NBC getting involved in the process. So that's just the whole deal about the exclusivity thing. And of course, we know that we are going to implement it. We know that once it is implemented, everybody is going to be a beneficiary. We are also, maybe I should also assure those who are investing that we also think that this may also be grounds for them to even further maximize their investment. As we speak in Nigeria, we have about 700 licensed broadcast stations. And that for us is a big potential. So we think that if you share your properties well, right, and you are able to attract revenues from people you share to, you are more even able to maximize profit. Probably if you are dealing with only one channel. So I want them to come with an open mind. Let me also talk to certain specific questions that maybe we need to correct. Isioma talked about the very vague definition about broadcasting. I checked the broadcasting code, and on page 188 of the code, not the amended copy, the 188 of the code, there's a definition for broadcasting, which essentially says that it is transmission of content, whether or not encrypted, through radio waves or other means of communication for reception by the public using any receiving apparatus. Now, so the code actually defines broadcasting. Now, Isioma also agreed that perhaps there may have been some little drafting errors, and of course, like in any document, you can't totally expect an totally error-free document. We'll take note of this. I'll be very glad if I received all the papers that you guys have brilliantly delivered. So we'll take them up and look at them critically, and put them in our thinking bank so that we can work around some of the issues for the future. But let me also make the point that there is a ratio provision in the Broadcasting Act. For cable television services, minimum 20% local content, right? And for the open terrestrial, minimum 70% local, 70. So we intend, even as we go, and I can foresee that in the future, we may even have to increase those ratios. Like I told you earlier, some people never thought that Nigerian content was good enough. They were increasingly seeing evidence that Nigerian content probably is the major driver on most of these channels, including foreign operators. I tell you something during the COVID pandemic, at the beginning of the lockdown, and because we wanted Nigerians to have access to information, real-time information, we sent directives to the radio stations and TV stations across the country, especially the cable TV stations, to open their local channels, right? And I wouldn't want to mention names. One of them was very reluctant to open the local channels. You would think that the local channels were not price channels. But they felt that if they opened those local channels, maybe it may lead to a decline in their revenues. We had to insist before they did so. So what it means is that local content is becoming highly priced content, right? And that whoever is bringing content into Nigeria, I had a discussion recently on a radio program with a great gentleman, Dimbo, right, who said he was the producer of Sons of the Caliphate, and also Khalifat or Halimat, some great movies. And that I think they had been commissioned, and they were looking up to some exclusivity. And I made the point to him to say, look, yeah, I agree that you have had some huge investment in this production. But why don't you think about the benefits of those who actually own the narrative? If you are doing Sons of the Caliphate, obviously you are looking at the Sokoto Caliphate, you are looking at the history, the traditions, the culture, the religion of people of northern Nigeria. And you go to their environment, you harness their resources, you harness their folk tales and narratives, you recontemporize them, and then you put them on channels that cut the original owners of this content from having access. I think that is not fair. If anything, you must create a window so that even people who are the original owners of this content can also derive, if not anything, some psychological benefits from seeing a reenactment of their own history. So ride sharing diversifies benefits, and we think it is good for this country. So I want those who are investing to have an open mind. We don't have a history of betraying or encapsulating or frustrating any operator within the creative entertainment sector. Nigeria has been host to a lot of creative endeavors across the country, across the world. People have come and gone, and they've brought all kinds of content, some which are not even allowed in many other countries. So again, I make the point that there's no intention to drive away investment. Investors are very welcome, but investors must also realize that there is a national imperative. We want to drive our own environment. We have a responsibility to thousands of teeming, creatively talented and hugely skilled young Nigerians that are seeking opportunities. You know, we need to stimulate development, growth, especially within the creative sector. And we think that if we jointly put the provisions of these amendments together holistically, we can give value to the intentions and not to begin to suspect that the intentions will not be of benefit, even when we have not put them to use. I think that generally I've tried to talk to the issues, but also finally respond to a comment I saw on the screen about somebody who was talking about engaging stakeholders. Even in this amendment process, we did engage stakeholders. You can't hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, sir. Stakeholder engagement.
Yeah, so we invited stakeholders. We had a session at Leola Hotel in Lagos, where people came and expressed their views. Before then, we had focus group discussion with several experts within the industry. And don't forget that this is an amendment. It's a small piece of legislation that is attached to an existing document. Hopefully in the next 2 years, there will be a major review of the broadcasting code. And then we will come for opinions, we will come for views, we will call for position papers, and then we can look at all the issues again and also take another decision for the good of the industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those explanatory, those thoughts. Because of time, we would have to take all the questions together. We have a lot of questions on our Q&A box, and we also have questions. We want to also allow participants to actually voice out some of their questions. So we had a question. The first one is from one of our panelists, which talks about arbitration and her being a mediator, and quite a few of us. There are other means of alternative dispute resolution. So is there room to amend that provision and expand it beyond arbitration? That would be the first question going to DG. Now, the other questions on the comment box, I'm going to read them out, and when I open the mics for participants, you know, just ask your question and let us know who the question is addressed, who has to answer the question, which of the panelists you're addressing with the question, and then we can take about 3 or 4 questions from the participants. But I'll just read out some of the questions we already have in the Q&A box. And then while we wait for other participants, just raise your hands if you want to ask a question live. And then, you know, just quickly, we can't spend too much time now. So just use 1 minute for each question, please. So just indicate by raising your hands. Okay, so the first question here is from Ahudia Ukiwe Amudu, and it says the intervention by the MDC affects already existing business contracts by movie heavyweights etc. How would these conflicts be satisfactorily resolved? So this has to do with contracts that are already in existence. I'm guessing that that's for the DG, or Isioma can also answer as well. Another question from Adeyemi Johnson says, film industry should go before regulators so that Prof can respond to, oh, that's not a question, that's a comment. So there's a question here on law enforcement. It says, one of the biggest challenges we have in the country is law enforcement. So my question is, what are the measures put in place to ensure easy enforcement of the bill? Professor Armstrong, I hope you can hear these questions. This one is about enforcement. The first question from Beverly was about arbitration and other forms of...
So come and put my video so they know I'm coming. Please, I'll nod my head. Yes, you want me?
Okay.
Okay, you want me to answer those few?
We have 3 now. Let's take some more so that we can just, you know, has anybody raised their hand? Okay, we have 2 attendees. So allow them to ask their question. Who do we have first? Don Omope, you can ask your question now.
Unmuted. Hello?
Yes, we
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. One question I actually have is in regarding, I'm in huge support of the NBC code and every single day. I feel it's groundbreaking, and I support what everybody has said. Isioma and everybody on the panel. But one thing that is of interest to me is actually looking at news and looking at intellectual property within the news space, because we have quite a lot of aggregators in Nigeria, from Bella Nigeria to Instablog to Linda Ikeji, who just takes people's intellectual property, aggregate it on a platform, and make money off it, without any money going to a lot of these news channels that invested in the process of getting this news. And it's a huge problem. And it's something I would hope the NBC can also look at, because this is also part of intellectual property in itself. And that's my question.
Okay, who is it addressed to?
The NBC director, and any other person that has an opinion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll go to the next live question. I hope you all are noting down the question so that you can respond. So we have Adeyemi Johnson. I think I read out his question, but I'm guessing you have another question. Go ahead.
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good evening, everybody. And I have to say that I'm very, very impressed with the quality of discussion. It's been fantastic. I mean, I've learned a lot about the code just from listening to the speaker and the DG. My question is directly addressed to the DG in terms of how will the code address barriers to entry into the industry? Because that's one thing that would also increase competition and improve quality if there are no barriers to entry. In the sense that if the code can create
availability
that makes it easy for competitors to come in. So how does the code address that? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Adeyemi. So let's take 2 more questions and then we'll take the answers for that. We have Regina, a lady. Regina Udalu, right? Is that the next person? Okay, go ahead. Regina, you have to unmute yourself. We're trying to unmute
Hello?
you.
Sorry. sorry. No, I say thank you for this conversation. I think it's very important and imperative. And I hope that, this content can also be allowed to the public so that others who weren't able to join in today can listen to it. So my question is this. I heard what Professor said about, for example, the content of, I'm a film producer, sorry. So content of Sons of the Caliphate being on Netflix and other platforms, right? Yes, I agree with him in the fact that, yes, it needs to be made available to the consumers in Nigeria, right? And possibly the diaspora. But what is actually painful, or I don't know how we're going to go about this question, is most of the channels don't pay for content. And so if you're telling a content provider to provide content and you are not being paid to have your content on those platforms, how do we go about this?
Good question.
Brilliant question. Thank you so much, Regina. And that's what I was talking about, the creatives. They have people who are finally paying them good money for their content. And it seems like that's, going to be distorted right now. So let's just take one more question from the audience, and then we can go over to the DG to respond. GJ Olania. You can unmute your mic. Okay, go ahead. GJ, can you hear us? I think we might have to allow another person, because we have to unmute. Yeah, we have to allow another person. Or let's just take the answers right now, because for some reason we cannot hear Jide Olania. Okay, so over to you, Professor Armstrong. You have a lot of questions for you.
Okay. All right, I tried to scribble down some of the questions. Maybe I'll begin with Regina. We have had situations before where advertisers, people.
Oh dear, I've lost him.
Wow, I think we just lost him, his internet, but I'm sure he's going to join us. Those questions and comments were very good. There's also a poll as well, so you can take out time to, okay, he's back, okay. Go ahead, sir. You have to unmute yourself, sir. We're trying to unmute you. And maybe you might turn off your video because of the bandwidth.
Okay, thanks, Chinenye. I was trying to make the point that the amendment of the code will take off the video. Right, are we better?
Yeah. Much better.
So I was trying to say that one of the intendments, obvious intendments of the a situation where broadcast stations are owed tons of money, and we have seen that over the years. Where even in their frustration, broadcasters have argued and monies that owed to them, owed to broadcasters, by bringing EFCC, the Economic and Financial Crime, to prosecute people who are owing broadcast stations tons of money. But there's an ingenious, quote unquote, ingenious provision in this amendment that probably states that if you are indebted to broadcast stations for a period of a quarter, then you are blacklisted, right? And want an opportunity to continue to abuse the platforms and deny them of their money. I'm sure that other advertisers and those who seek to use broadcast platforms will be a bit more disciplined. For the broadcaster, and that way, once the broadcaster is empowered, he is more able and more obliged to pay for whatever content that he acquires, and that is a win-win for everybody. Adeyemi talked about availability of the broadcast code. Yes, it's something that we need to do. We have been doing it. Most of it is put online, and we also have it at various offices of the National Broadcasting Commission. Anywhere there's an NBC office, either at the state or zonal level, you are sure to find copies of the broadcast code. And we even give the copies free to the students of mass communication where we have opportunity, because it is also important that students of mass comm know some of these provisions for their academic and future professional practice. Don raised a very critical point about IP of news. And you raised an issue which Isioma also talked about earlier on regarding the regulation of channels and platform, right? in the digital era, for us at the NBC, the licensing of platforms is going to be two, or the person who distributes the platform. And then we also expect that whoever is a channel operator that's operating on any platform is also licensed. A quick example is to say, look, DSTV is licensed, right, as a content aggregator and transmission company, but it's also incumbent on the channels that are operating on DSTV to also obtain a license from the NBC or some form of registration. Yes, somebody talked about the worry for enforcement. I know enforcement is always difficult, but what we want to assure is that we are determined to enforce the provisions of this amendment. We have a functional directorate for investigation and enforcement in NBC, and only yesterday I had a critical strategy meeting with them, how we are going to evolve strategies to make sure that these provisions are fully implemented, so that we can see the gains for whatever provisions that we have made. Will it affect, with the sports federation carried along in the production of this code? Yes, NFA had radical big-time inputs, right, in the provision of the 6th edition of the code. You can be sure that all those provisions about injecting some money into the local league and local sports must definitely have arisen from concerned local parties, you know, and we agree with them that that is a deliberate strategy to also get the local industry to grow. So the NFA and all the other footballing associations that were ready to contribute at that time made serious inputs to this provision. Yes, about existing contracts, yes, I know that this Yoma and Beverly and Folari may want to talk to that, but what I know is that from the time of this code, that the code has been approved by government, whatever contracts are incoming, wherever there is a desire, we definitely have to activate the provisions of the code. And for me, I think that that's the major starting point. Now, will we accommodate other dispute resolution strategies and mechanisms? Why not? The regulator is not the final authority in issues of disagreement and arbitration. We know that the courts are there, but if issues are resolved amicably outside the courts, I think it's a win-win. But what the power the law gives to us is to arbitrate, right? And once we arbitrate, we'll come up with our own decisions. It's our belief that our decision will be binding. Any other one, Chine?
Well, there are so many more, you know, in the but because of time, maybe I'll read out 2 more, and then I'll allow all the panelists to just answer as much questions as they can in their closing remarks. But we'll need the closing remarks to be between 2 to 3 minutes for each person. But it's been a good one. The participation has been amazing, and we've had over 80-something participants, you know, come in, log in, and log off. We'll definitely make this available on YouTube, because I know a lot of people have been requesting for the content. And I really urge Professor Armstrong, these kind of engagements should be continuous. You know, people should be able to dialogue and propose solutions that can also be implemented in the policy. So I'll just take 2 more questions. There's one here. Considering the capitalist economy we desire, let's be honest to say that many of the local broadcast stations are not revenue profit accelerated. If a producer spends 100 million on a film, will NTA be willing to buy such content for half the price? And I think somebody said something about getting the broadcasters to have a certain standard for the kind of content that they put out there. There's another one about what about online broadcasting? How does NBC regulate content of creators? Yes, but on that note, because of time, like I said, we'll take the closing remarks, and please, panelists, try as much as possible to respond to some of the comments that were and questions that were raised. And then we'll start with you, Beverly, for your closing remarks.
Oh, okay, closing remarks. Okay, that means I need to go to my
closing remarks and recommendations as well.
Okay,
yes.
Well, I mean, my view is, especially with regards to ADR, I don't know. My opinion is I think it's a little bit closed, the MDC code, with regards to how it will handle any disputes that would emanate from, the broadcasting dispute. Wherever there's big money, disputes will ensue. And I don't think people are going to be too comfortable. The industry will be too comfortable knowing that it's the sole means is arbitration. We already know how arbitration works in Nigeria. It's like a cabal. It doesn't work properly. Very few people have an opportunity to participate in arbitration. Mediation is proving. In fact, I'm seeing even globally that perhaps mediation might be the better answer to Africa's problems. We need to consider things like mediation. We really need to, because arbitration is closed, it's final. And then what happens if there's a disagreement with the arbitration award? So I think there's a little bit too much finality on some of the things that we've discussed today. Again, very, very excellent comments from my colleagues, Isioma, Folarin. I'm looking at all the comments from, the chats, Telema, Chidima, some excellent discussions here. I really hope this doesn't end here. There's so much more we need to do to discuss. Professor Armstrong, you've been brilliant. You've been very amiable. I really hope that there will still be room to have another roundtable stakeholder session, because you can see that people are interested in this. Sport is a lifeline. It is not just entertainment, it is a business sector, and we have to protect it. We need to grow it. We need to make sure that the code will actually do what it says. It will promote and support the industry, not stifle. So that's where I want to leave things personally. And but very good deliberations today. I really enjoyed it.
Well, okay.
Beverly. Yeah, Istima, go ahead.
Yeah, of course. I think Beverly has said everything in terms of the discussion has been really dynamic, and I also think it has been very layered in terms of having so many different perspectives on the issue, and so we've had a very, I think, well-rounded discussion. Thank you also, Professor Armstrong, as well, and thank you for the correction, because I did go and check the MBC code 6th edition online, and I didn't see the definition. I must have missed it somewhere. But even then, I still think that online transmission isn't adequately covered under that definition, and the definition still needs to be expanded based on what the market is saying and how a lot of things are moving to online. I wanted to answer one of the questions, which was, how does the code affect existing business relationships? This is one of the tricky things, that happens whenever there's a change of law. What happens to the people who were already in a relationship before the law changed? Laws can't be applied retrospectively. So my assumption would be that those relationships would probably be able to stay the way they are, except if one party wants to shift their position. But it's all still the same thing. Anytime there's a change in any kind of law that is meant to guide how people conduct themselves, it really can't apply retroactively. So it would then be a problem when one party decides that they want to take advantage of the new regulation, and I guess it would be subject to litigation, or arbitration, or whatever form of dispute resolution that the parties have within their contractual agreement. And we'll be able to see, I hope it's litigation, because that would be good jurisprudence to be able to guide us on how to move forward. And we need more jurisprudence in this sector. So we do need more litigations in this sector. And then there was also a question about NBC dealing with infringements during news reporting. This is actually more of a copyright law issue, less of an NBC issue, because the copyright law gives an exception to copyright infringement for news reporting. And I think a lot of news platforms take advantage of that. And the way it's written in the copyright law, there should be a certain limitation on what kind of, fair use, quote and unquote, what percentage of use is considered fair and then moves from being fair to exploitation. So this is something that needs to be addressed in the copyright law. And I mean, there's a copyright bill that they're trying to pass. I know there's a 2015 version of that bill when you check online, but I know it's gone through a lot of changes, but no one really has a copy of the new one. So that would be something to be done with the copyright. I think the MC take an interest in that language about fair use. So that's just to answer that. Really pro the code with amendments, some drafting amendments, and of course I will, if the NBC asks, actually I've actually been doing this, and I'm sure other people here have, I would definitely send in my drafts of certain sections, and not just of, particularly to reflect this differentiation between platforms and channels, so that the intention of creating a more competitive market would not have the reverse impact of then sort of stifling healthy competition, but there isn't an abuse, there isn't a monopoly or an abuse of people in advantageous positions. I don't think that we should leave it to the market. And when people talk about other countries, there's a history of other countries having interventionist policies to protect certain sectors that they are trying to grow. So I support intervention, but the intervention has to be done with significant industry consultation, and there has to also be a way to measure its success. I don't know what that would be, but there needs to be a success measurement, after all of this, to see whether it's working. And I think, thank God, it's a regulation. So it's always a lot easier to amend regulations. So there really isn't, I'm not panicked. I think we should go ahead. We should make some redrafts to the code and put it in action and see how it works out, and maybe revisit it if it's not working. But I don't think we should leave it to the market, because that hasn't been working. And we really need to do something else apart from leaving it to the market. I think even going back to the larger administrative law arguments and talking about ground norm versus regulations, with the entrance of the Competition Act in Nigeria, and that's having a restriction, a prohibition of restrictive agreements, really and truly, the NBC has no other choice but to address that within its code. So even when you look at, would this stand up against constitution, it will, because there is a prohibition from a legislation, a core legislation, which is the Competition Act, that prohibits restrictive agreements. And when you look at even the language in the amendments, which are not perfect, it seems to work in tandem with what that act says. I'm hoping I don't miss anything else out. Speaking on sports, I think that there is a need, whilst I completely agree that sports not working is not just because of broadcasting, but I think that it's important that the code encourages the production of local sports content. I believe that's what it's attempting to do. Maybe there needs to be further conversation about some other steps that need to be taken alongside what has been proposed in the code now to make sure that it has that effect. So that's my conclusion, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isioma. Folarin, are you still there? Your closing remarks. And before we go to Folarin, I just want to say, because there's so much that has been spoken about today, we'll have this on YouTube or on Facebook, one of our platforms, but you can follow us on TF_advisory on Instagram or on LinkedIn, the FEMA Advisory, and we'll notify every participant when the video is available, and when we also curate some of these other webinar sessions. So Folarin, your closing remarks and your recommendations.
Okay, thank you very much, Chineye, and fantastic conversation, I must say. I will take a point of departure from Isioma in the sense that I think the market forces should play out. If you look at the economies of scale, the economies of everything, market forces should play out. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, we have not had a system where, market forces have been allowed to play out, and overregulation also doesn't work. When I look at the country, I mean, if I may make a much broader, a macro point now, one of the problems that we have in Nigeria today is that we suffer from overregulation, and you find that playing out in so many ways. A student of mechanical engineering will never see certain types of machines because there's an act, enacted by the National Assembly, which is empowered by the exclusive legislative list, that restricts access to certain types of technology. So an engineering student will never see, for example, an aeroplane motor. Some of us will never own a Cessna airplane, for example, if you wanted to own or buy one, because the airspace is overly regulated by NAMA and by FAA and by all these other organizations. That's the reason why when you see all those videos on YouTube or you see the news item, a Nigerian has made, or a Nigerian student invents a car. What you end up seeing is a mock-up. It's nothing close to what you would actually expect, a serious person to be interested in. It's because of over-regulation. And I think to a very large extent, over-regulation retards development. And that's why it's important that market forces should be allowed to play out. Yes, it's important that local content should be encouraged, but who are the consumers of this local content? It's Nigerians. Nigerians have shown time and time again that if you give Nigerians the choice, Nigerians will choose local content over foreign content, provided that the quality is high. And how do you ensure that the quality is high? Quality is high when people invest in that industry. How do you attract investors? Not by insisting that companies should spend a certain amount of their revenue building content. Investors, you and I know what we spend our money on. If you see good content, you will put your money in it. And I ask myself a very simple question. Why is it that in spite of the fact that you have such an explosion of content, why don't we have certain types of, why don't we have situations where these money bags are people who, the very wealthy, why don't they invest in building studios locally in Nigeria? Why don't people invest in entertainment? That goes to a large extent to the business model. And I would just quickly say, before I come to the issue of business models, that one of the problems with over-regulation is that you start to find situations where people start to regulate and impute things into regulations that should not be there, like morality, things that affect the right of people to contract, and it becomes a very dicey situation. And that's why the unintended consequences are often weigh against the intended consequences and the good intentions. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in Nigeria is not the absence of laws, or is not law enforcement. One of the biggest challenges that we have is ignorance. Many people don't understand that when it comes to intellectual property, the right is yours. The right doesn't belong, it's not NBC's business, with due respect to NBC, to help you protect your rights. There's already a law that is in place. NBC is there to ensure that, one, whoever violates the law is prosecuted, and whatever measures are put in place, are put in place across board. They apply to everybody across board. And so, and that's why Nigerian Copyright Commission has a big issue. Everybody expects NCC, Copyright Commission, to go after infringers when it's the right of the copyright holder to actually go to civil court and file whatever action you need to file, whether it's for an antompila or it's for declaration of profits, and so on and so forth. So I think ignorance is the problem. If people engaged lawyers, IP lawyers, and got proper advice, we would not burden NBC and NCC and all the other regulatory agencies with the headache of enforcing our rights, and that's that. I think another problem is the barriers to entry with NBC. The barriers to entry, Prof, due respect, sir, it can be very difficult to get licenses, both radio, TV, and all the various licenses. That's a big issue. And I think when there's an economic principle that says that when you reduce regulation, you increase compliance, and you could find that with, here in Nigeria, examples, the VAIDS scheme of the FIRS, when the vice chaired by led by the vice president, when barriers to entry were reduced, there were the conditions for payment or declaration of tax were relaxed. You found a much larger number of people came into the tax bracket. It's a natural law of human beings that we run away from regulation, especially when the regulation is stifling. So barriers to entry is very important. If people can enter easily, for me, regulation is not about controlling who comes in and who goes out. Regulation should be about ensuring that there's a level playing field for everybody to operate in, and that those who have a lower, those who are not strong enough, the strong do not overpower the weak. And that's, a competition a competition issue. Is a competition issue. Now, with the issue of channels paying for content, I think everything boils down to the business model.
1
Okay.
minute wrap
I'll try to
up,
speak
please.
very fast. So everything boils down to the business model. If you look at the business model for terrestrial TV, you find that the content producer has to be the one who pays for the time. You buy the time, and so the TV station doesn't buy time; they sell time to you, and that's problematic because it played out with music. In the way it played out with the music industry is that artists had to pay DJs, pay stations to get their music played on air, which is wrong. And so I think the if you look at the business model for VOD and all these other and streaming content, it's the content maker is king, the content producer is king, and people pay the content producer, and that's why it's important that we should not chase those companies that are willing to invest in local content away by introducing barriers to their to them making their profit. So I think to a very large extent the business model determines how the flow of capital works. All in all, I'm very glad that Professor Armstrong has, is willing to be part of this conversation. I think there's a lot of learning that can take place, and especially when the regulator is willing to engage with society. I think there should be a much more robust kind of engagement that should even span the course of weeks, if not months, before such regulations are crystallized. That way, there's an opportunity for everybody to give input. If because of COVID and because of the restrictions and movements, it may have been difficult for people to actually give, their participate in certain, legislative or certain regulatory reforms that have occurred or that have taken place during this period. So I would say, thank you very much, Prof. Thank you, Chineye. Somebody said, can panelists stick to a 2-minute closing remark? My own time was shortened at the beginning.
We want to make up.
Yes, I know Chineye has allowed me to make up for that. Thank you very much.
Conversation. I need you to promise us that we're going to have more of this conversation because people need this sensitization. A lot of people are not in the know. Even lawyers sometimes are not even aware of this MBC code. And there has to be more engagement with the stakeholders, the people in the creative industry. The investors have to be babied even at this point in time because Nigeria needs the investment to come in. The creative sector needs the inflow of capital. So we need to look for a common ground. We need to look for something that will not seem as if the government is against the investors. So I'm so happy. I must commend you for staying to the end of this webinar. I know that we plan to stay for an hour, 30 minutes, and we've run over time. I'm really impressed with your openness and your willingness to have this conversation with us. So on that note, I'm going to hand the floor over to you to give your closing remarks and comments. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chinenye. Let me first of all appreciate you for introducing me to three hotly beautiful and hotly intelligent ladies, and one very rich barrister, Folari Aluko, very rich man indeed. I can see it from his appearance. But I think it's been a very rewarding discussion. I agree with you that we need to continue with this. It can never be too much to educate the people regarding statutes or regulations that affect their business. Of course, we all know that broadcasting affects almost every aspect of human living. So it's multi-dimensional, and to that extent, across demographies. We'll do that. It's not as if we've not been doing publicity. We'll see that there's a need to. The recommendations you have made, very spot on. We have taken notes, and as we move forward, thank you again for your time, and thank you so kindly for this intervention. And hope that those who initially wanted to send NBC to Golgotha will have a rethink and give us
back to you for this closing remarks by video
Uh,
because it's breaking up.
your
So maybe you might have to send us another video that we'll put on our platform with your closing remarks. But can you hear us? Your video isn't.
I can hear you.
Your audio is going in and out. Okay, sir. Okay, go ahead. Sir, the network is very poor. We can't hear you.
So what did you, can you hear me now?
Okay, we can hear you now.
You said that I should do my closing comments again.
Well, we can hear you now. So
what did you say?
Yes, you can complete. We can hear you now. Because it was breaking up. We couldn't hear you. I think we would need to wrap up because of network. I think it's because it's about to rain. But we definitely have to have these conversations continue. Like we said, follow us on our social media handles, TF_advisory. Thank you so much, Beverly Abakoba Onyejianya. I hope I pronounced the last name well. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, Isioma Idigbe. Thank you so much for your time and for your passionate remarks on this subject. We've all learned so much. Thank you so much, Folarin Aluko, for your insights as well. And I just believe that all the lawyers on this platform, we need to do more to enlighten ourselves, sensitize ourselves, so that we can also help with spreading awareness. Because obviously government cannot do everything, alone. We all have a role to play, and that's why we've put together this platform to be able to sensitize people. And I think we need to have more collaborations, even amongst lawyers and amongst professionals, to do more of the sensitization, because we're helping the markets too in our own way. So on that note, thank you all our participants who joined us from all over Nigeria. This was kind of short notice, but at least we got very, very good participants who contributed well. The comment section was really going up, and the Q&A section as well. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. We are far, we've spent beyond the time that we marked for this, but it's been a great conversation. I've had an amazing time. Thank you, everybody. Oh, Prof is back. Prof, we're signing out now. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. We'll be in touch with you for more of these conversations. Here are the results also for the polls as well. I think people, okay, so it says, do you think the amended broadcasting code is a positive for Nigeria? 41% said yes, 28% said no, 31% said maybe. So it means that a lot of people are still on the fence about this. More sensitization needs to be done. The next question was, do you think enough consultation has been carried out with the relevant stakeholders? And people said no. A lot of people are saying that we've not, So the third question is, in your view, does the ban against exclusive ownership and broadcasting of content infringe on provisions of the Copyright Act that allows producers to sell their content? People are saying yes, that it's a breach. So I guess those are the thoughts. Number 4 says, do you think digital streaming platforms will continue to patronize Nigerian content with the coming of the amended code? Some people said they will continue. Some people said no. I think majority, it was tied. Yes, maybe. The next question and the final question is, do you think the amended code will help Nigerian broadcasting stations to compete favorably with their counterparts within and outside Nigeria? And majority said no. So I guess majority of the people who tuned in are not really in support of this code. So more work needs to be done by the policymakers to sensitize the public about this code, and we need to look for ways to make it more adaptable, more implementable. So on that note, I'd like to say good night to everybody. Thank you so much for participating. Have a wonderful evening. And yes, we continue these conversations and this webinar series. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye. have recording that needs to be converted before viewing. Come and see what's on my screen.
Yeah, that's where it always does. It usually converts to cloud.
But just come. So my internet should be still on or what?
No, it is on cloud.
So why is it loading 1%?
Where are you?
I just saw it on my page. Because I don't want to disconnect it now and then it will not convert.
Next to convert.
Hello, Chick.
Okay, thank you everyone for tuning into our webinar. It's been a good session. We're ending now.
What did you say? They're saying Augustus and